Tower Defense Simulator, some enemies can have a ridiculous amount of HP. Certain towers are specifically used to take down these behemoths, as they specialize in having lots of DPS. In this video, I'll be ranking these towers from worst to best, reviewing aspects like their DPS, values, capabilities, and more. Before I continue, do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe to join the Blue Head Mafia. It helps me out a lot and I really appreciate it. Also, if you want to talk to me, suggest videos, or maybe even be in one, consider joining the Blue Head Mafia Discord. It's a great time and I hope to see you there. In last place is the turret. Don't get me wrong, the turret is currently a good tower. However, out of all the towers on this list, I think it's the worst option. It costs 4,000 cash to place and 58,250 cash in total at max level. This makes it the most expensive tower in the game. Though, the turret can reach some incredible levels of DPS, having 191.26 DPS at max level. That gives it a DPS cost ratio of 3.28 DPS per 1k spent, which is alright. The level with the best value is the level 2 turret with a DPS cost ratio of 4.35 DPS per 1k spent. It has one of the biggest ranges in the game, often covering the entire map compared to a DJ. It also gets hidden detection, and unlike some towers in this list, it does not need to charge up its attack. The second an enemy gets within its range, it will start shooting. This paired with the fact it has an incredible range makes it very reliable against fast enemies. Unfortunately, you can only place 5 turrets, meaning that the max DPS you can achieve using only turrets is 956.3. That is the lowest out of any tower on this list, which is the primary reason as to why I placed it so low. The turret is a good tower with some fantastic capabilities, but the placement limit holds it back from being great. Next up, in 5th place, we got the Golden Minigunner. The Golden Minigunner costs 3,000 cash to place and 23,250 cash to fully max out. When an enemy enters its range, the Minigunner has to rev up its gun before being able to attack, though it will keep attacking until there are no more enemies within its range. The level with the best value is actually the max Golden Minigunner. At max level, it has a DPS of 103.45, giving it a DPS cost ratio of 4.44 DPS per 1k spent. It also gets hidden detection at level 2, and most importantly, it has no placement limit. This is what makes it different from other high DPS towers, which usually have a relatively low placement limit. This makes the Golden Minigunner arguably one of the best late game DPS towers for solo in game modes, as you're able to place up to 40 of them, giving you a whopping 4,138 DPS, which is by far the most you can get using any tower. Unfortunately, in a squad game, you're only able to place up to 20 of them, meaning the max DPS you can achieve is 2,069. Although not having a placement limit is great, you can mitigate the issue of a placement limit by simply bringing multiple DPS towers. Even though the Golden Minigunner is undoubtedly a great tower and is probably the best DPS tower for soloing, the rest of the towers on this list either have much better utility, DPS, or value, which is why I rank the Golden Minigunner as the 5th best DPS tower. Ahead of the Golden Minigunner, in 4th place is the Engineer. The Engineer is an extremely unique tower, being able to build sentries to help it attack enemies. At max level, with all the sentries placed, the Engineer has a DPS of 359.44 for a total cost of 52,400 cash. That gives it a DPS cost ratio of 6.86 DPS per 1k spent, which is actually really good value. It can be placed 6 times, giving it a max DPS of 2,156.64, which is absolutely incredible. The sentries also deal damage through missiles, which makes the Engineer a good option against crowds of enemies. Also, because the Engineer only costs 750 cash, it can be considered an early, mid, and late game tower. I feel like a lot of people underappreciate this aspect of the Engineer and just mainly consider it for its max DPS. A lot of the time, early game towers end up being not that useful in the late game, so having a tower that can be used in all stages of the game can be extremely useful. Not to mention, the sentries are also semi-immune to stuns, having a regenerative shield that protects them from a single attack. This can be a huge benefit if you don't want to bring the medic. Now, the Engineer does have a couple of issues. First of all, the sentries cannot see hiddens, and while the Engineer itself can, it only has a DPS of 55.69, making it a pretty bad option against hiddens. But most importantly, the sentries are considered units, causing them to not be affected by buffs from the commander or DJ. This is a huge issue, as that means the Engineer is essentially missing out on a 55% fire rate boost and a 35% range boost. While the Engineer itself is affected by its buff, because the Engineer relies so much on the sentries for DPS, the 55% fire rate boost ends up being only an 8.5% increase in DPS. With the commander, the Engineer has a max DPS of 390.07. That is undoubtedly still an insane amount of DPS, so even with this downside, the Engineer can be a great tower. However, the Engineer not being affected by buffs is the reason I place it in 4th place. Ahead of the Engineer, in 3rd place is the Pursuit. The Pursuit is a helicopter that flies around in a circle, shooting enemies within its range. The Pursuit is unique in the fact that its range follows it as it moves around, meaning that sometimes enemies can manage to sneak past it. Unlike the Ace though, when an enemy is within the range of the Pursuit, it will stop and fire at them, dealing a large amount of damage using its machine gun and missiles. This makes it a bit more reliable than the Ace, though its targeting is still pretty bad. At max level, it has a DPS of 169.78 for a total of 45,050 cash. That gives it a DPS cost ratio of 3.77 DPS per 1k spent. However, the level 2 Pursuit has almost twice as good value as its max level, having a DPS cost ratio of 7.13 DPS per 1k spent. That's actually some fantastic value, and is one of the reasons I placed it above the Engineer. However, the biggest advantage it has over the Engineer is that it can be fully buffed by the Commander. With the Commander, the Pursuit has a DPS of 263.16. This is still lower than the Engineer with the Commander, however, the Pursuit has another trick up its sleeve. You can place up to 10 Pursuits, giving it a max DPS of 2,631.59 with the Commander. In comparison, you can only place 6 Engineers, giving it a max DPS of 2,340.42, which is 291.17 DPS less than a Pursuit. Also, the Pursuit is completely immune to stuns, unlike the Engineer which is only semi-immune to stuns. This paired with its higher max DPS with the Commander makes it an overall better option against things like the Wave 40 bosses. It's also got some great crowd control using its missiles, much like the Engineer. However, it is important to note the flaws of the Pursuit. First of all, and most importantly, the Pursuit's targeting is very unreliable. It can easily miss fast enemies as it flies around trying to catch up with them. It also does not move as long as there are enemies in its range, meaning that those fast enemies can just run past it. Also, unfortunately, the Pursuit cannot see hiddens. Though, in summary, the Pursuit is a fantastic tower. It has incredible DPS, crowd control, and great value. The only thing really holding it back is its terrible targeting. Ahead of the Pursuit, in second place, we have the Ranger. The Ranger is a single target, slow attacking high damage cliff tower with the biggest range in the game. At max level, the Ranger has a DPS of 128.28 for a total of 43,350 cash. That gives it a DPS cost ratio of 296 DPS per 1k spent. The level 3 Ranger has much better value with a DPS cost ratio of 3.91 DPS per 1k spent. Though this is much worse value than the Pursuit and much less DPS, so why have I placed it above the Pursuit? Well, the biggest reason is targeting. While the Pursuit is one of the most unreliable towers in the game, the Ranger tends to be the exact opposite. Due to having the biggest range in the game, it can track down enemies across the map, making it extremely reliable. Essentially, no matter where you place the Ranger, it'll get the job done. Also, because it is a cliff tower, the Ranger is fully immune to stuns, just like the Pursuit. Not to mention, it can shoot lead and flying enemies, making it one of the only towers in the game which can damage lead balloons, landing it as a staple in many hardcore strategies. While the Ranger does have lower DPS than the Pursuit, the difference isn't huge. They both have a placement limit of 10, giving the Ranger a max DPS of 1,282.8 and the Pursuit a max DPS of 1,697.8. So 10 Pursuits have 415 more DPS than the Ranger. While that is a lot, I think the Ranger's several advantages and much better targeting makes up for that. Just make sure that when you're using the Ranger that you set it to strongest targeting. At max level, each shot deals 450 damage. You don't want to waste that on a 10 HP enemy. Setting it to strong allows the Ranger to make the most out of its damage and deal the maximum amount of DPS it can. Overall, because of the Ranger's fantastic utility, amazing range, good value, stun immunity, and good placement limit, I think it's a great tower, and in general, better than the Pursuit. Now, in first place, surprise surprise, we got the Accelerator. The Accelerator is an absolute beast of a tower. It functions a bit like the Minigunner, having to charge up its laser gun before attacking. But one crucial difference is that the Accelerator's gun eventually overheats, forcing the Accelerator to enter cooldown. At max level, when considering its charge and cooldown, it has a DPS of 286.26 for a total of 49,700 cash. That's a DPS cost ratio of 5.76. This may sound like a worse version of the Engineer, which has a DPS of 3.59.44 and a DPS cost ratio of 6.86. However, unlike the Engineer, the Accelerator is fully buffed by the Commander and DJ. With the Commander, the Accelerator has a DPS of 443.7, while the Engineer with the Commander only has a DPS of 390.07. That's 53.63 more DPS, giving the Accelerator a DPS cost ratio of 8.93, which is absolutely fantastic. You can place up to 8 Accelerators, giving it a max DPS of 2,290.08 or 3,549.62 DPS with the Commander. The Accelerator is also able to see hiddens, which the Engineer, Pursuit, and Ranger are unable to do. While the Accelerator's charge up can be troublesome against fast enemies, it has some great range which helps mitigate the long charge up. The Accelerator's value, range, hidden detection, and insane DPS makes it, in my opinion, the best DPS tower in the game. But what do you think? If you disagree with any of my rankings, feel free to let me know what you think in the comments down below. And I'd like to remind you that all of these towers are good, just some of them happen to be better than each other. If you want to vary it a little, or just enjoy using another tower, that's perfectly fine. Before I end this video, I'd like to thank Michael Blocks Games, Vexy, and JohnDro684 for supporting my channel by becoming a member. If you'd like to support my content and get some special perks, then consider becoming a channel member. It's a great way to help me out, and I really appreciate it. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, and subscribe to join the Blue Head Mafia. My name is CORSO, and I'll see y'all in the next video.